All right, good morning. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. It is January 10th, 9 a.m. This is our first meeting of 2024. We welcome everybody back, and we will start with a roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Ackerman? Here. Commissioner Cross?
Present.
Commissioner McGowan?
Here.
Commissioner Mesner?
Here.
Commissioner Oath? Commissioner Ray? Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 of 7 commissioners present.
Great. Good to see everybody. Welcome back. We will move into our agenda today. We start with commissioner comments. If anyone has comments, please raise your hand. Commissioner Mesner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just letting folks know that the next Produced Water Consortium meeting is this Friday at 9 a.m. It's a virtual meeting, and the agenda is available for that meeting both on the DNR website as well as the ECMC website, I believe. And so if anyone has any questions about that meeting, certainly let me know or shoot me an email.
Excellent. Thanks for keeping us up to date on that front. Other commissioner comments? All right, seeing none, we move to consent agenda. Does anyone have questions with regard to consent? Seeing no questions, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve consent. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, consent is approved. Now we will move to the next matter, which is a docket 2212-00371. It is a payment of proceeds docket, and it is a request for oral argument on an exception to hearing officer recommended order. Having bumbled the title, I would suggest that this is complicated enough that a bit of oral argument might make some sense. And so I would be inclined to grant the motion for oral argument, perhaps giving both parties an opportunity for 5 to 10 minutes of oral argument at our next available agenda. That's one commissioner's musings. Others with thoughts? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought the same thing when I've been reading through some of the information, and it would be helpful to have a little more understanding. And then I think we have an upcoming executive session with our AAG to get some assistance on some of these arguments.
All right. Seeing no non-consent, I would move that we grant the motion for oral argument and give each side up to 10 minutes each at the agendized item. I think it's for next week. I'm not sure. But whenever it comes up, they're going to get time for oral argument. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion is granted. All right. The next matter is a great one. It is the ECMC summary of disproportionately impacted community meetings for cumulative impacts rulemaking. Commissioner McGowan and Commissioner Cross are running this, and I know we've got a PowerPoint in our docket. Who wants to go first? Commissioner McGowan or Commissioner Cross?
I am kicking it off, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Cross and I are going to tag team, and staff is going to help us drive since we're tag teaming, and it might be dangerous if we were in charge. So I wanted to start off by saying, oh, sorry, Elias.
My apologies, Commissioner McGowan. I just wanted to confirm that I believe Commissioner Oath was planning on attending this today, and she's not able to make it till around 9:45. My apologies on the scheduling here. Mr. Chair, do you mind if we take a 5-minute break or so I can confirm that? And again, apologies. We will make sure to make the agenda more accurate moving forward. I did not anticipate moving as fast as we did this morning.
Dude, we're always fast. Okay, let's take 5 minutes and we'll give you a chance to catch up with Commissioner Oath. And if we need to, we can take up the next OGDP first and then go to the cumulative impacts analysis.
I think that might be advisable, just so we do ensure. I'd hate to come back from 5 minutes and say we need to take another 30 minutes. So
Do you want to touch base with the attorneys for the next OGGP to see if they're available during this 5-minute break?
yes, I'll do so right now.
Okay. Let's return at 9:10. All right, we're back. Hearings Manager Thomas, what's up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've confirmed Commissioner Oath probably won't be available till around 10. And so we've elevated counsel for TEP. They're available to begin their presentation on the OGDP now. And apologies again to Commissioner McGowan and Commissioner Cross for jumping the gun on your presentation there.
Excellent. Ms. Jewell, thanks for coming and pinch hitting here early in the day. We appreciate it. We now will recognize the OGDP for TEP Rocky Mountain LLC, docket 2305-00188.
Thank you, Commissioner Robbins. I always knew that Boy Scout motto, "Be prepared," would come in handy. Good morning, Commissioners. Michael Jewell with Jewell Jemerson Natural Resources Law, LLC. On behalf of TEP Rocky Mountain LLC, proud to be the largest, most innovative operator in the Piceance Basin. Now with its 10th OGDP before you today. I don't think we're counting anymore, though. The TEP is up to date on its blanket financial assurances. We're grateful for your time and consideration on this chilly Wednesday morning. And as usual, we have Mr. Jeff Kirtland, the regulatory manager for TEP Rocky Mountain, who will be available to present to you and address any questions you have concerning this application after my initial summary. And joining us again from last time is Mr. Adam Tinkersley. He's the planning manager for TEP. He's largely responsible for masterminding the right locations for our operations. And along with Jeff, he shares responsibility for the detailed plans of development that you come to rely upon and that we have attached on this OGDP application as well.
Before you get going, then let's get the two witnesses sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So members of the panel, I'll just go one at a time and ask you to raise your right hand, state your name, and swear to tell the truth. I'll begin with Mr. Kirtland. If you could, yeah. Just state your name and that you swear to tell the truth, please.
Morning, I'm Jeff Kirtland, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Tankersley?
Adam Tankersley, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
You're up, Mr. Jewell.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. And we thank Ginger Malashauskas, the rest of the ECMC technical staff for his insights and feedback in this OGDP process. We can already sense the improvements made by Ms. Larson, Mr. Schwartz, and the rest of the team, and we look forward to continued increases in efficiency. This application saw no amendments, and that's a testament to the solid collaboration that we are seeing with permitting, though we did see one sitting back of the forms during the completion process. Which leads us to take this presentation head on in reverse a little bit compared to our usual structure. The director's recommendation you see had 7 conditions of approval, which led the recommendation to be styled as conditional. However, TEP represents today, without any hesitation or condition, that it not only accepts these COAs, but also represents that most, if not all, of these COAs are already operationally built into our plans, and they'll certainly be permanent fixtures of this OGDP should you approve today. And these COAs are in brief form that TEP shall provide the location ID for the processed drilling fluids. Number 2, that the operator shall provide a site-specific Form 27 that details the management and final disposition of the drill cuttings. 3, that the operator shall ensure the cuttings trench is maintained properly. 4, that analytical results for the initial well samplings and blended cuttings will be submitted to the ECMC. The operator shall maintain records for the life of the facility. However, the rules do require 5 years, so we presume this will be a one-off and not necessarily a new requirement for all OGDPs. Records shall be transferred with a change of operator. In no way shall be disposed of in the on-site cuttings trench other than water-based drill cuttings. And the last one is already done, that the operator shall submit a Form 4 sundry. We could provide that document number should you like. In the application technicals, this TR 3228.597 OGDP location sits on portions of Section 28, Township 5 South, Range 97 West in Garfield County, Colorado. TEP formally requested you approve an order pursuant to Rule 303 and Rule 503G1 for an approximate 360-acre oil and gas development plan, which includes 5.77 acres of surface use. As custom, this is reused acreage with 3.96 acres of redisturbance and 1.253 acres of new disturbance. And commissioners, less for you and more for others who are listening. This is a little different than the Wattenberg and how we calculate acreage. We can use DSUs in the peons, as you know. We typically do not. So these are usually a little more bespoke in working with engineering and geology to get to this overall gross figure, which is why I keep referring to our collaboration with permitting to arrive at these numbers. But a few statistics, this means this acreage overall is only 21.68% new, 78.32% existing. 17 new wells, 18 total on the OGDP. That's 0.34 acres per well. And after reclamation, it's only 0.07 acres per well. Consider that's less than half of an average house lot in Denver. This continues our commitment to reuse and minimize surface impacts in the trend toward consolidation and smaller pads. So also front and center, the issue with this OGDP is indeed wildlife. I'll keep the particulars for Adam and Jeff to address, but the one thing I want to plant a seed is that the leks that are nearest, the sage-grouse leks, are over 1.5 miles away from this OGDP, and there are other avoidance factors that we have been in very tight conversation with Taylor Elm and CPW. And so we'll get into more detail with that, but that is the grand issue that we will be discussing. But other factors affecting public health, safety, welfare, and environment that we have addressed. No proximate governmental authority outside Garfield County that we've been in discussion with, mostly because the nearest town is Parachute, 16 miles away as the crow flies, 31 miles away by road. Light and sound. We continue our standard practice to minimize excessive light sources, practicing proper directionality regardless of our very remote location. The reason is simple. Again, dark skies are a resource. This area of Colorado rests in a larger area of designated dark skies. We like knowing we're doing our part to preserve that bit of solace. We continue the use of the latest pneumatic technology even when it's not required. We have proximity to publicly maintained roads, reusing pads and minimizing build out, water pipelines and water recycling. You've heard that from Jeff, and you'll hear it again, how we're using that process to minimize our impact here. We're over 1 mile away from the nearest residential building. For DIC, our EnviroScreen score is 43.94. CDPHE therefore declined consultation. The land use is rangeland, and the greatest use, other than development, as you're seeing here, is periodic recreational, mostly with hunting. The nearest downgrade surface water feature is 1,639 feet away from the southeast boundary line of the pad. The nearest seasonal stream is 1,106 feet away from the southeast boundary.
Mr. Jewell, I've lost Commissioner McGowan.
Oh,
Mind just holding just a sec? Let me.
yes, sir.
She indicated her power went out and she's trying to reconnect. But this is all good stuff. I just didn't want you to have to repeat. So let's get a full panel here. Oh, okay. We got her back. All right. Commissioner Jewell, if you wanted to repeat so carefully the last minute or so and then get started again, I think that would be great.
Did I lose you at EnviroScreen, maybe? I'll start there. The EnviroScreen score was 43.94, so CDPHE declined consultation. The greatest use of the land is rangeland and periodic hunting. And so the nearest downgrade surface water feature is 1,639 feet southeast from the boundary of the pad. The nearest seasonal stream, no annual stream, is 1,106 feet away from the southeast of the boundary of the pad. BMPs in the application include extensive stormwater control and spill responses that effectively meet the local needs. And granted, not to oversell the issue, TEP would not bring an OGDP to you that was not 100% compliant with the rules. But we know we have a wildlife concern that we will discuss in greater detail here. But importantly, most of all, this comes to you with no protest, no inquiry, official or unofficial. We haven't received any phone calls from the public. Otherwise, we would bring those to you for further discussions. We can air out any further public concern that we could address and make sure we have that fully daylighted for your full consultation. But with that, I will give this over to Jeff and Adam, and we'll close out from there.
Thank you, Mr. Joel, and good morning, commissioners. And I'm also very, very appreciative of the ECMC staff, including John Noto and Ben Frizzell, who've reviewed this application. I wanted just to start with a brief history and background related to this project. So the TR 3228-597, as Mr. Yule alluded to, is an existing pad. There was one producing well on this location that was spud back in the late 90s. This oil and gas location is located on private land on top of an area called Trail Ridge. And it's a very remote area in the northwest portion of our development area, and there's very limited access to the public. It's on private land. What's important, I think, is that this is not the first time that the commission has approved this pad and a very similar plan for this project. The pad and the wells were originally approved in 2017. However, those wells were not drilled within the time frame of the original permits, and so the permits were abandoned. For this new project, we actually did engage for the first time with ECMC staff in the pre-application consultation process. And we've done that several times since engaging in this for the first time. It went very well. From our perspective, the purpose was to understand what the requirements would be for proposing what we felt was a repeated project, if you will. So we met with ECMC staff on April 6th. And established that because this new plan expanded the oil and gas location to a little over 1 acre, the new Form 2A and the OGDP application was required. Effectively, had we not expanded the pad and just went for the wells as a resubmittal, the hearing probably would not have been necessary. But we appreciated the feedback and the direction from Ben and his staff. Additionally, as we contemplated this 2017 approval, similar to what we did in 2017, we consulted with CPW on what are known impacts to sage-grouse. This was something that was contemplated in the 2017 request, and so likewise, we wanted to ensure that we were on the same page with CPW with respect to mitigating that known impact to sage-grouse habitat. And of course, consulting with CPW, as I've said before, is a core principle in our development planning process that occurs regardless of if we're located in a HPH due to the large landscape where we operate. And in just a minute, I'll ask Mr. Tankersley to provide a little more detail about this important and intentional work with CPW. But I did want to provide a bit of an update on the schedule that was originally proposed, given the timing associated with the processing of this application. Originally, the Form 2A identified construction of this pad or reconstruction of this pad would occur October through November of 23. Now, obviously, we're past that. And so the new schedule for construction is May of 2024. Drilling operations originally were scheduled for May through September of 2024 and have now been shifted to December 2024 through April of 2025. Completions will then follow. Originally was September 24 through January 25 and are now scheduled for April through July of 2025. And then reclamation would occur after that in August of 25, based on seasonal needs, et cetera. So I wanted to at least put that out there. I know there was a question, and I'll come back to some questions here in just a moment, but wanted to at least set the stage for the change of that schedule as we turn it over to Mr. Tankersley to talk about our consultation and discussions with CPW. Adam.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, commissioners, for reviewing this application. I wanted to start by just providing a brief overview of our engagement with CPW. Just generally speaking, we meet with them approximately quarterly to review ongoing operations and upcoming development projects, as well as give them an update on planning efforts for future development. We also walk through a consultation process with them that really provides them the opportunity to provide input to ensure that our projects are protective of wildlife and incorporate best management practices that avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts to wildlife. CPW always provides a really good feedback on ways that we can improve the project and really develop a application that is the most protective of the wildlife species involved. And CPW has pushed back on development projects in the past that they believe could be problematic for a particular species. As for the TR 3228-597 pad specifically, this pad location is located in greater sage-grouse priority habitat. The proposed pipeline is also located within priority habitat. It's approximately 200 feet or so off the south end of the pad. The pad is also located within greater sage-grouse general habitat. Just a small portion of the northern edge of the pad is within general habitat. Also wanted to point out that the TR 3416-597 pad, which is going to be the remote completion support pad for these operations, is located within greater sage-grouse general habitat. The TR 3228-597 pad is approximately 1.7 miles from the nearest sage-grouse select site, and the TR 3416-597 pad, which is the remote frac pad for these operations, is approximately 3 miles from the nearest select site. During the process of planning this location, we did consult with CPW on April 4th, 2023. As part of that, we detailed the plan of development for this particular site. We also discussed potential wildlife impacts, alternative locations, compensatory mitigation, noise and lighting impacts, and best management practices for these activities. As part of the review under the plan of development, we provided them with the schedule, which has changed as Jeff mentioned earlier. We also detailed the requirement to expand the location slightly to accommodate the new rig that we have. So the total disturbance for this project is 5.912 acres. Of that, 1.253 acres would be new surface disturbance. As for potential wildlife impacts, the primary concerns discussed during consultation are timing of activities, habitat loss, noise, light, and traffic impacts. We also discussed alternative locations. While TEP did not do a full alternative location analysis for this project, we did discuss potential alternatives with CPW from a wildlife perspective. One of the locations that was considered during discussions with CPW was the TR 2421-597 pad, which is located to the north of the 3228-597 pad. To utilize that location, we would drop roughly 50% of the proposed wells from this location. So based off of that, that location would not be viable for development of these proposed wells. All other viable alternatives considered would have been new locations, which would have created an increase in impacts to high priority habitat through service disturbance, which would result in habitat loss and fragmentation to sage-grouse habitat. As you know, sage-grouse habitat in this area is quite expansive. There's really no opportunity here to completely avoid sage grouse habitat. With that, CPW provided their waiver to the ALA requirement, which is detailed in the wildlife mitigation plan. As for pit spray mitigation, we did review this with CPW during consultation. We discussed direct impacts and indirect impacts. For direct impacts, we were assessed a fee of $13,750 for the 1.25 acres of new surface disturbance. We also were assessed a indirect impact fee of $33,288 for indirect impacts associated with these activities. CPW utilized the Greater Sage Grouse Habitat Quantification Tool to assess indirect impacts. As part of the indirect impact fee, there was an additional fee included in that, which was associated with potential winter operations. As you know, the previous plan avoided, for the most part, the winter TL for greater sage grouse. And the new plan has us developing through that winter TL. During consultation, we contemplated that scenario and wanted to ensure that those impacts would be addressed in the plan up front. As for noise and light impacts specifically, we informed CPW that we would be in compliance with ECMC rules for noise and light. They determined that noise and light impacts would not be a significant issue, given that we'd be underneath the standards there under the 400 series rules. And that was a determination based on the use of existing facilities, distance to active lek sites, topography, and vegetation within this area. As for best management practices, we discussed a lengthy list of best management practices for wildlife habitat in general, as well as for sage grouse specifically. And I just wanted to highlight a few of these BMPs specifically. One being that our construction activities, that would be pad construction and pipeline construction, would not occur in the greater sage grouse lekking season, which is March 1 through April 30th. And that those construction activities and associated vehicle traffic would be restricted to daylight hours only. In addition, I wanted to highlight the fact that we are utilizing the TR 3416-597 pad as the remote completion support facility, which is further away from the lek site than the TR 3228 pad. And also wanted to highlight that TEP will be conducting a migratory bird survey prior to construction activities if those construction activities occur between April 1st and August 30th. With that, we feel like this application really implemented the full scope of the mitigation hierarchy: avoid, minimize, and mitigate. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that. And thank you again, commissioners, for your time this morning. And before we close our presentation and open it up to questions, I did want to respond to a couple questions that were posed to us prior to today's hearing. The first question really asked about an update related to our proposed development schedule. I believe we've gone through that, but quickly, again, construction's May of 2024. Drilling will be December 24 through April 25. Completions in April 25 through July of 25, and reclamation in August of 25. And the big change there is that drilling and completion operations are now scheduled within the greater sage grouse winter TL, which was contemplated during the CPW consultation and was addressed in the wildlife mitigation plan, as Mr. Tankersley mentioned. The second question, I'll just read this question, and it's a similar question to what we've discussed previously. The question is, I see emissions from storage tanks in the first year of production. Is this because the pipeline cannot accommodate the original volume of produced water? It has to be stored in tanks at the beginning of production. And I think the nature of this question is really trying to understand and you understand the need for tanks and the impacts that tanks have, specifically in this case on Again, the use of tanks in the Piceance Basin is essentially a part of managing our large volumes of produced water, especially in that first year of production prior to well declines. As a well is produced, produced water is effectively collected in is dumped from individual wells through a separator that separates the condensate and the water and the gas. And then we'll send that water to storage tanks using pneumatic valves that operate with compressed air. The water is not stored long-term in these production tanks. These tanks are then used in the overall process to stage the produced water temporarily so that we can pump that water off the pad to a centralized recycling facility via pipelines for recycling of produced water. This is beneficial to us from the standpoint of trucking. Effectively, no trucks are needed for this. We sort of calculate the saves in this case about 15,000 plus water trips, trucks, if you will. But I think more importantly, it's important from the emissions standpoint to understand that all of these tanks are vented and tied into an overhead line that is then run through a high destruction efficiency enclosed combustion device. And so there's good efficiencies in terms of our destruction of emissions. And that's what's, I think, identified it in the Form 2B. But of course, after the first year of production, the condensate, produced water, and emissions will decrease over time. So again, those tanks are vital to our production process to not only store water and collect water in that first real large year of production, but are vital in terms of our ability to recycle this produced water, treat it, recycle it, and then move it throughout our larger area for development. So I'm hoping that sort of gets to the question. Happy to dive in a little deeper if necessary. With that, I was just going to put back to Mr. Jewell for final comments, and then I think we can open up for questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Commissioners, I'll just leave off with, I was reminded this morning, it was about a decade ago, I took a call from Mike Connor with Department of Interior talking about greater sage grouse, and we were talking about the status of that species in the Rocky Mountain West. And of course, the concern with BLM, even though this is not BLM land here, we're talking about habitat loss and fragmentation, the concern there on BLM land, making sure operators can find a way to mitigate that. So I'm proud that overall, it seems most operators in the Rocky Mountain West have found a way to do that. So we're proud that TEP in this application is avoiding habitat loss and fragmentation. And we're continuing that trend to recycle pads, if you will. So again, thank you for your time and consideration. We welcome your questions and guidance on this application, as always.
Great. Thank you to the panel for the presentation. At this time, commissioners, we open the panel up for questions. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really just have one question, and thank you for going over the revised schedule. Appreciate you responding to that question. It was pretty quick. I think I was able to get it written down. I just want to verify that construction is May of 24. Drilling is December of 24 through April 25th, which would be during the closure period, but was addressed with CPW and additional compensatory mitigation paid. Completions from April of 25 to July of 25, with drilling to commence in August of 25. Is that all correct?
Yes, reclamation. Yeah, thank you. And yes, and then reclamation in August of 2025. You have it down perfectly.
Gotcha. Thank you. So was that a revised schedule then reviewed in detail with CPW?
Yes, thanks, Commissioner Ackerman, for the question. Yes, we did update CPW on the revised schedule, and due to the fact that we did contemplate that in the wildlife mitigation plan, they did not see any issues with the revised schedule.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. So my understanding is that once you came up with the revised schedule, you retouched base with CPW, and their recommendations on this project still stand as that was considered during the initial phases. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Great. Further questions for the panel? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and the information provided in the application. I just have a question as I'm reviewing the cumulative impacts plan and within there, some of the identification of the potential impacts and mitigations that are being considered. And this is me nitpicking a little bit because I understand both from testimony given today and other evidence in the record what the plan is and how the impacts that are identified in the cumulative impacts plan are anticipated to be mitigated or minimized or avoided. But I do note that in the cumulative impacts plan, it does indicate that there does not appear to be any adverse impacts associated with wildlife, and that would include potential impacts associated with greater sage grouse, and so no mitigation measures are necessary. In application, the compensatory mitigation is the mitigation that addresses the known impacts that are occurring to sage grouse habitat associated with this application. So I think it's important in that cumulative impacts plan to identify those and understand, in that evaluation that there are impacts that are anticipated and that there are mitigations that are being proposed. And those mitigations in this particular application include compensatory mitigation, both direct and indirect, as well as some of the other BMPs that are being proposed in this. And so I just want to clarify that so that when we do evaluate these cumulative impacts plans, which are important plans, that it does, fully evaluate and address the impacts associated with the project. So more of a comment than a question, I guess.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. That's a good comment. We'll take that to heart in our process and very valid. Thank you.
Thanks. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Okay, seeing no further questions, I believe we move into the deliberation phase of this docket. Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the presentation and the materials that were provided by the operator. I would agree that wildlife is the primary point of concern on this OGDP and specifically greater sage grouse, as was pointed out. And, the 1200 rules were put in place pursuant to Senate Bill 19-181, in part specifically to improve consultation with CPW and materially affect the implementation of wildlife BMPs in developments. And we strengthened at that time the 300 series rules in increasing the consultative role of CPW in OGDPs. And we also, in the 1200 series, strengthened protections for wildlife, and we specifically address sensitive species such as the greater sage grouse in this project. As noted, the greater sage grouse isn't a formally listed ESA species, but it is in Tier 1 of CPW's State Wildlife Action Plan, and it's treated as a sensitive species, and that's why you have HPH associated with greater sage grouse. As was noted, there was significant consultation with CPW on this project. A formal ALA wasn't submitted due to a CPW waiver, but that waiver was the result of significant discussions between TEP and CPW about alternative sites, as was detailed in the materials and in the testimony that we heard today, with CPW ultimately agreeing prior to an ALA that there weren't sites that would be more suitable for wildlife. I think that's an appropriate approach in an area such as this, where the associated HPH is pretty much all encompassing in the area with regard to estimated occupied range of greater sage grouse. This application resulted in 18 wildlife BMPs, and 11 of those were specifically designed to protect greater sage grouse. So if people think we take just kind of a suite of BMPs, which is a good approach, and then apply them to every OGDP, that's not exactly true. They're always focused on the wildlife that are in question, in this case, greater sage grouse. Those 11 BMPs included no construction between March 1st and April 30th during lekking season, and construction and traffic restricted to daylight hours. As was noted, the frac support pad was moved farther away from the LEC areas with topography covering the line of sight, which is important for greater sage-grouse lekking. Including other BMPs such as seed mix, reclamation, equipment design, all intended, there are nuances, but all intended to discourage wildlife from the area, as well as a proper approach to lighting intended to have minimal impacts on wildlife. There are about $50,000 in compensatory mitigation to improve sage-grouse habitat offsite associated with this project. And CPW stated that it believes that the operator has effectively consulted with CPW to implement the full mitigation hierarchy, and also stated it doesn't have any unresolved issues or objections to the permit application or to the materials submitted by the operator. CPW notes that it is okay with the flexibility requested by this operator, specifically in their consultation summary, to drill during the winter months. And I can also testify, as noted, that CPW has pushed back if they have found that to be an unacceptable solution. They've worked with CPW on additional associated compensatory mitigation as was set forth. And also CPW researchers and biologists provided data that indicates this particular area of the parachute Piance roan population of greater sage-grouse doesn't currently experience a significant amount of nesting activity, but yet are continuing to protect because of the overall HPH. And I just wanted to note all that to state that I think increased protections prior to the application ever coming to the commission demonstrates that the approach taken pursuant to Senate Bill 181 and the regulatory changes that we made pursuant to that are working to better implement and affect the wildlife conservation portion of ECMC's mission. Lots of times people will ask, well, you know, you approved permits prior to your rulemakings, and you continue to approve permits after your rulemaking. This application is a great example of why permits are continuing to be improved. There are significant improved protections for the species in question, greater sage-grouse, once again, before it ever gets to the commission. So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the considerable work that's been done to protect wildlife with regard to this OGDP. I recognize CPW's increased consultative role as essentially our expert consultants with regard to wildlife, and I'm in support of this application.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ackerman. I appreciate when you identify an application that has wildlife as a central issue and do a thorough job of articulating the approvability and why, and it's not just a rubber stamp. I really appreciate you going through that. Others with deliberative thoughts? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and really appreciate Commissioner Ackerman, your thorough analysis of the applicability of the wildlife rules to this particular application. And I certainly concur with your findings there. Just a couple of additional things that I wanted to put on the record as things that I think are important to acknowledge in this particular application. And as is true with a lot of TEP operations on the western slope in the Piance Basin, the utilization of reused and recycled produced water and centralized water systems is a significant element within this particular application. I think the cumulative impacts plan and our annual cumulative impacts report indicate that reused and recycled produced water in the Piance Basin is upwards of 85% of all water used in oil and gas activities. And I think this is another example of how the utilization of pipelines and centralized produced water facilities allow that reuse and recycling of produced water to occur on the western slope. And so I think that's an important element of this. I also want to acknowledge the utilization of an existing pad in this particular location so as not to increase the amount of habitat fragmentation that's occurring in this particular area. And so those are my additional thoughts associated with this, in addition to the findings that Commissioner Ackerman brought forward, and I also would be in support of this application.
Excellent. Thank you for the additions, Commissioner Messner. Further deliberative thoughts, or does someone want to make a motion? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll move to approve. I don't think I need to include any of the conditions of approval. I think those were all included, but AAG Mercer can correct me if I'm wrong there.
AAG Mercer?
Thank you, commissioners. You're correct, Commissioner Ackerman. All of the COAs from the director's recommendation are already on the Form 2A, so don't need to be added here.
Thank you. Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further deliberation? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the panel. I also want to send out a thanks to our staff. The work staff has done with you that resulted in an application that did not have to get amended, speaks testaments to a positive working relationship under our protective rules. So appreciate that on staff's part. Okay, we're going to take up the cumulative impacts piece next. Let's take just 5 minutes to get that set up. It's 9:51. Let's return at 9:56. All right, welcome back. We now look forward to the presentation from Commissioner McGowan and Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm hoping I'm not gonna lose my power again. It's super windy at our house, and I think that's why it went out the first time. So I'm hoping I'm gonna stay online here. So I just wanted to say good morning, and I wanted to say thank you to everybody who participated in our community meetings. Commissioner Cross and I were out and about some of our disproportionately impacted communities, those communities that have been impacted by oil and gas development. I think that despite some listening sessions and informational dockets, we still felt that it was important to get out to those communities that have been affected and ask them kind of their thoughts on our cumulative impacts rulemaking. And so Commissioner Cross and I are going to attempt to summarize those and what we heard. First, I thought we'd give you some background. It was pretty clear to Commissioner Cross and I in some of our meetings that I think some folks maybe are not aware of some of the things that we do already as a commission that might be able to provide a good springboard into our cumulative impacts rulemaking. And I just wanted to share some information for folks as we then head into what happened at our community listening sessions. Next slide, please. Okay. So just a reminder, Senate Bill 181 kind of changed the mission of the commission to regulate in a protective manner, and included kind of the directive to work with CDPHE to evaluate and address potential cumulative impacts of oil and gas development. And then last legislative session 1294 was passed, which kind of gives the commission an opportunity to do, I guess, what I would call cumulative impacts rulemaking 2.0 to define what cumulative impacts are, and then further figure out how to evaluate and address. So we definitely have a direction from the legislature, and I think that commission has been contemplating what the next step for cumulative impacts rulemaking should look like, and that started in January with the listening sessions with Commissioner Ackerman. Next slide, please. So a reminder that Senate Bill 181 and our mission change really kind of was the commission's first bite at the apple for cumulative impacts, and putting and applying a lens from a cumulative impacts perspective. And I think some important examples that come up often in our hearings and deliberations are alternative locations, 2,000-foot setback from people, residents, and buildings, and considering high priority habitat as part of our deliberations. Then the next level down as part of our cumulative impacts lens, so to speak, is when the commission reviews individual oil and gas development plans. And as part of that analysis, and you heard some of that discussed just in the hearing before, is the submittal from an operator of a Form 2B, which contains cumulative impacts data. That can be, am I in a high priority habitat, and what does that look like? What kind of water am I using? Where's the water coming from for fracking? Where does it go when I'm done? Am I near residential building units, and what kind of other activities are within a 1 mile radius? All of that kind of data is included in what we call a Form 2B. And then the operator also has to submit a cumulative impacts plan, which describes the process that an operator went through to first avoid, then minimize, then mitigate impacts that might potentially be part of an application. And then finally, the commission has an annual cumulative impacts report. We've only had 2 years of that report, and where was it, one? And we'll be getting the next one here in February. And then finally, we're heading into another rulemaking to look at, you know, what has worked well, maybe what has not worked well. Can we do a better job at evaluating and addressing and meeting the expectations of our stakeholders and the legislature? Next slide, please. So I did want to, I think we heard as a commission through our listening sessions and the informational dockets, as well as in the community meetings, I think some frustration from folks that, or a narrative that the commission continues to approve permits and we're denying very few. And I wanted to kind of provide some data about what things looked like before our mission rule change and then since Senate Bill 181, and the new kind of lens and process that we go through, and how we've seen what I hope people will see is both a change in quantity and quality of applications that have been put before the commission. So you can see kind of the change in, or the numbers here and what this looks like since 181 passed. Next slide, please. And for those of you who are visual like I am, this is what has happened to both approved permits, the locations and the wells. And you can see then what has happened since Senate Bill 181. Next slide, please. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, a lot of our conversation for cumulative impacts rulemaking has focused on what happens when some of this development is happening in a disproportionately impacted community, and a community who's already experiencing a lot of impacts from oil and gas development. So this is a slide that shows what happened in 2022. We're still working on 2023 data. You can see that the red pins are those locations where the commission approved oil and gas development locations within a disproportionately impacted community. And of the 78 locations that were approved in 2022, 8 of those locations, or about 10%, were within disproportionately impacted communities. Of those 8, 4 were on the western slope and not within 2,000 feet of a residential building unit. 3 were on the Front Range, and of those 3, 1 was within 2,000 feet of a residential building unit, but had signed informed consent, and 2 did not have RBUs within 2,000 feet. And then the last one you can see there is in Southwest Colorado, and that was an expansion of an existing location. It is within 2,000 feet of an RBU, but also had signed informed consent from the building owner. So I'm hoping also that folks can see that we do have circumstances where we are approving things within 2,000 feet of, or within a disproportionately impacted community, but even more limited within 2,000 feet of an RBU. And I hope that that's because of kind of those initial rules that we've implemented as part of Senate Bill 181 rulemaking. Next slide, please.
And before we,
Cross.
thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Before we address what we heard in some of our most recent community listening sessions, I do want to reemphasize the work that's been done to date on the cumulative impact rulemaking and recognize all the hard work that's been done both by stakeholders and our staff. We began this process in January and February of 2023 with 4 listening sessions. These were held both during the day and at night to try and get as much input as we possibly could. In March 2023, Commissioner Ackerman provided an overview of those sessions, highlighting the topics that stakeholders expressed interest in being addressed in a cumulative impact rulemaking. In April 2023, we accepted additional public comment on the annual cumulative impacts report that Commissioner McGowan addressed before. And after receiving updates on the stakeholder process in May 2023, the legislature passed and Governor Polis signed HB 23-1294, which required, amongst other things, that the commission promulgate rules to evaluate and address cumulative impacts, including a mandate to define what cumulative impacts are, and to provide resources to support affected communities. You'll see in August of 2023, the commission opened an informational docket, and written comments were received through September 15th of 2023. A public hearing was held on the informational docket on October 12th and 13th, and the commissioners all provided comment on November 7th on their thoughts thus far of what they'd seen in the different written comments and informational listening sessions. And then, as Commissioner McGowan noted, in December, we had 5 additional community meetings where we tried to go out to the specific disproportionately impacted communities to get a better idea of what was going on in some of those communities and what thoughts that they specifically had on the cumulative impacts process. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the different themes that we received on the informational docket. And it's important to note that much of the feedback we received in our community meetings did overlap with what we heard during our previous informational sessions, our listening sessions at the beginning part of the year, the written comments provided on the informational dockets, and in October as well. So some of those themes included, again, the definition for cumulative impacts, as well as disproportionately impacted communities, improving the processes that evaluate and address those impacts, the consideration of thresholds. We've also heard terms used such as carrying capacity or allocation limits, continuing to improve collaboration with our sister agencies such as CPW and CDPHE, and also the improvement of verification processes and the linking of achievement to goals in our processes. Next slide, please. So now as we actually get into our 5 most recent community meetings, again, 4 of these were in person in Greeley, Erie, Commerce City, and Rifle. And then we held an additional meeting virtually. It was a virtual town hall that I think had, aside from staff members, I think 78 people were present, if I remember the numbers correctly. So at the start, I want to first thank everyone for attending those meetings. I know that this was time out of your busy calendars, and I appreciate you taking the time and coming to speak with us. I personally found it very helpful to get out and talk to some of the people in the communities and get a better understanding of what issues were important. So if we could, next slide, we'll go into some of what we actually talked about and going back to some of those themes. First off, let's start with the actual definition of cumulative impacts. Again, this is something that's required under HB 23-1294. And it's important to note that in a lot of our informational docket, in a lot of the public listening sessions, as well as in these community meetings, we heard a lot of the same ideas around how we should define cumulative impacts. And I think 2 of the things that really stick out is, 1, the inclusion of a holistic baseline assessment, as well as an inclusion of foreseeable future development. I will say that there was a little bit of disagreement about what all should be included in the baseline data and kind of the baseline assessment, but some of the different things that were talked about and suggested as being included were including P&A wells as part of well density, looking at the history of health impacts, looking at baseline air quality and OGDPs in the same way we address baseline noise, looking at VOCs, looking at HAPs, looking at particulate matter, greenhouse gas emissions, existing traffic, existing pipelines, looking at water quality, looking at water quantity, looking at what wildlife habitat exists, and also looking at view sheds. Beyond kind of looking at what is already there, as well as what's foreseeable in development, a couple other issues were also talked about. And one of those would be the idea of what kind of geographic area should be included for cumulative impacts. A lot of the suggestions differed here as well. We had some people continue to say that the 2,000 foot threshold that we look at now for setbacks is appropriate. We've had some people say that you should look at 2,500 feet. Some people suggested a mile, which is, as Commissioner McGowan noted, what we currently have in our cumulative impacts plan. And some people said it should be even broader, looking at an entire basin. For example, looking at all of the Piceance Basin, as we talked about in our last application. And finally, one of the other things that was addressed in the community meetings, as well as in many of the comments that we heard previously, was the idea of having some kind of threshold consideration. Again, that was different terms were used for that, but a lot of people wanted to say we should have some kind of threshold. You should enforce some kind of threshold, potentially have some kind of clear denial criteria, or some kind of, whether it be in part of the definition or whether it be in the rules. If a threshold is hit, then you should have something that said this is where application should be denied. Next slide, please. I believe this is Commissioner McGowan.
Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. How long have we been doing this? Another obviously big topic of conversation was how we are going to define and utilize the definition of disproportionately impacted community. A lot of folks are very familiar with the Environmental Justice Task Force work over at CDPHE and said, look at some of their recommendations and best practices. And obviously the Environmental Justice Task Force recommended a definition for disproportionately impacted community and recommended that it apply the same across state agencies. So there is a definition in statute that we can look towards. And I think some folks had some additional comments about how you could utilize that definition when we're looking at rules and additional requirements that should apply to disproportionately impacted communities. A lot of folks were interested in using EnviroScreen as one of the tools that we use in our evaluation process and our rulemaking process. And then again, the theme of, is there a threshold? Is there a point at which we say that a community has its bathtub is full? I know we've heard that analogy from our stakeholders before. And whether or not we should have specific denial criteria. So if the bathtub is already full or certain circumstances exist, is it an automatic trigger for denying an application? Next slide, please.
One of the other common things that came up was the topic of community engagement. And I think that this was particularly important for me personally, especially as HB 23-1294 also mandated that the commission take steps to provide resources to support affected communities. And so one of the things that we try to get out of these community meetings was, how can we improve our process? How can we get better transparency? How can we be more involved with the stakeholders? And I'd say one of the things that we heard a lot was that community members were interested in having a greater input in the process earlier, especially when we look at OGDPs, perhaps being involved before the completeness determination is made. As some people express concerns that they don't really get to have a say in location analysis. They don't get a say in having what best management practices should be used if they only get to be involved in public comments after that point in time. A lot of the other comments focused on some of the lack of notice and the lack of information available to stakeholders. Specifically, community members talked about having to kind of dig through the website, looking for pending OGDPs, not really knowing when OGDPs were available, and suggesting direct contact so people within a certain geographic area can be more involved and have better opportunity to comment. In fact, noting that at times they didn't learn about OGDPs been pending in certain areas until after the public comment time was already passed or close to passing. And so other topics around community engagement involved having more frequent meetings in public, the commission attending and sponsoring community events, attending community organization events, and also the idea of having stipends for people coming to visit as well. Next slide, please. So beyond some of the issues that were specific to cumulative impacts, we also did want to highlight that there was a lot of ideas expressed that went beyond the cumulative impacts rulemaking. And I think probably most prevalent among those was the issue of access to information and communication. Again, as was talked about in the previous slide, there was a lot of feedback that it was the community members would have to dig through the website to try and find things. And one of the common things that we heard was, while there is a lot of information on the website, it's not always easy to find that information. It's hard to know where to go for it, even for people that go to the website often. They don't really receive notification about different issues. And so there was some ideas, some suggestions that we update the website, that we make it more user-friendly. There was also suggestions that we have more information about specific locations. Issues such as, identifying operators, identifying emissions profile for sites, what equipment is at the sites, what kind of work was done previously. Also ideas around public health impacts that can come from those emissions, because there was also talk about having to try and not only dig up information on our website, but also having to go to CDPHE's website to try and find information as well. One of the suggestions that came up was having QR codes on the signs at each location that would make it easier to access some of this information rather than having to dig through the website. Some of the other suggestions that came up is because of concerns about the amount of information that stakeholders get from local governments, a lot of times they wanted to see if we could have notifications be sent out to groups or to everyone in specific areas, almost a reverse 911 sort of notice, especially when there's spills in areas and things of that sort. Another common thing that came up was the limitation in terms of languages. And beyond just having information available in Spanish, which is spoken a lot in many of these communities, there was also concerns that we should do it beyond that as well. I think in the Greeley meeting, it was expressed that there was 34 different languages spoke in that region. And so we should be able to have that information available in all those languages, both written on the website as well as available to pull up in other resources as well. I do want to point out that we talked about in these meetings, as well as it's important to note as well that ECMC has commenced a website refresh, and many of these issues are issues that we are trying to address with that refresh. We do know that there is some difficulty using the website. Sometimes information is difficult to find, and we do hope that this will bring about greater transparency, greater access to information, and alleviate a lot of this user frustration that we did hear about. Next slide, please.
So along the themes of where do we put this bucket? Because I like to bucket things, you all know that. There were a lot of comments in the hearings around enforcement, concerns about whether or not we had a robust enough enforcement program, and then some comments around whether or not if an operator, I guess I'll say, is in good standing, should or could be tied to OGDP applications. And then some comments around the grandfathering in of OGDPs and Form 2A. So when the commission adopts and approves new rules, what happens to those applications that are already in the hopper? And I think that there are actually some APA and legal limitations around that. And so hopefully, as we're discussing our cumulative impacts rules, we can get some advice and have a discussion about what are the rules around grandfathering, what are our limitations, or what can or we cannot do around grandfathering in. Next slide, please. I just wanted to let folks know kind of what we're hoping the schedule is for next steps. I know this is, even though we've been doing this for a while and getting input for a while, this is going to start feeling, I think, pretty quick, because we have to have our rulemaking done by the end of April per 1294. And so just wanted to give folks kind of a heads up of what the schedule was here as we move forward. We will be getting some draft rules from ECMC staff and our AAGs for consideration. We will then have public comment on those draft rules, and that's all going to happen hopefully here in January. And then after the commissioners give their feedback and those draft rules are updated and we take feedback, additional feedback from folks, then that official draft or red line goes to the Secretary of State. And then that's what we have our formal hearing around. And then that activity will all happen in April. And so I think it's going to feel a little fast for folks, and just wanted to let folks know what that's going to look like. Next slide, please. So I just want to echo what Commissioner Cross said. I just want to thank everybody who came to the community meetings. I know that the timeline felt short for some folks. I think despite the fact that we did a lot of stuff online, we did feel that it was important for us to try to get out to individual communities. And I'm going to echo, I appreciate everyone who took time out to come and join us. The virtual town meeting was probably the most successful with 70 plus participants, but those, as you know, don't feel as personal. And it was really nice to see folks that we see in our public comment a lot, or we hear from a lot, to see them in person again. And just want to say thank you. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Previous slide. Open for comment from commissioners. If you want to ask questions or you have any feedback about what Commissioner Cross and I heard from our meetings.
Great. If we could have the slides removed, we'll be able to see everybody. Here we go. Thank you very much for undertaking that effort and for delivering, it appears to me, on that effort. Just at a high level, did you come away with the sense that the DI community reach outs, that they were successful? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Chair. So I think that we stumbled a little bit. I mean, it's a work in progress and we're learning. I think things that were successful, we had, it was very conversational, the town meetings. We had interpretation services available. I think the folks who showed up had some really great ideas and were pretty tuned into processes that happen at the commission. There were some folks who came for the first time and just wanted to learn what was happening. I know that some folks were a little frustrated because the timing felt short. But I think hopefully we're just going to continue to get better at this. I think one thing that was, I don't know if comforting is the word I want to use, but what I felt good was that the themes we heard in our in-person meetings are very similar to what we heard in our listening sessions, in the informational docket, in the written comments. And so I'm comforted a little bit that I'm hoping that we're on the right track with what we're hearing, and we have the themes and the buckets. I feel from a large viewpoint are on track. So I know we stumbled a little bit, and I'm really appreciative of folks' space and grace, but given the short time frame, I felt good about getting out and about and the process that we used. And we tried to use some of the recommendations from the Environmental Justice Task Force and how we had the meetings, where we had the meetings, times and locations that were, convenient for folks in community, and having interpretation, sorry. Hopefully are some good first steps in developing our relationships with these communities. And I think our resounding feedback from all these meetings was, please come out and visit us more, and not just when you want to hear from us and you have something compelling, but just come out and talk to us and check in with us. And I know that we've talked about that as a commission, trying to improve on that. And I think that I think we can continue to do that. And I think it means a lot. I think it's important for us and for community.
Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to build on that a little bit because I agree. I do think that there was some frustration with some frustrations expressed about the locations that we chose, when we chose them, the timing we provided. But I do think it's also important to note that many of the community members did say they were appreciative of us going to them and taking the effort to go to them and take the time to speak with them. We heard it also, especially in Rifle, they expressed the difficulty in getting across the state, but also saying thank you for taking the time to get out there. And so I know me personally, I was glad to be able to participate in that, and hopefully we can do that more often.
Great. Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to express my appreciation for the work that's been done on this, and appreciate the fact that you're providing this information to us, and that the meetings were proactively held, and I think that the information that's gathered, as Commissioner McGowan indicated, seems within the same themes and buckets that we've been hearing in other mechanisms that we've utilized to solicit feedback on cumulative impacts. And I, for one, am really interested in that feedback and the information you've provided, and I'm looking forward to continuing conversations as we move into the formal stages of the cumulative impacts rulemaking. And I think that if folks who are listening have additional information or thoughts on the processes and the cumulative impacts rulemaking, I know that we're all available, individually for conversations as well, and certainly encourage that outreach to occur as well. So thanks again for the work that you've put into this, and looking forward to the next steps.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Just ditto. Thank you. I appreciate the leadership on this, and Commissioner McGowan, especially on the cumulative impacts process as a whole. And I do think that we're moving in the right direction. And I agree that I really do love that we're narrowing in on what we think are the most important issues to address during that process. And I think a lot of that's due to your continued outreach. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. I assume this PowerPoint will be available online.
Mr. Chair, I think we were just a little behind. It was supposed to be in the folder last night. I think it's in there now, and thank you to Elias for making sure that happened. So I, just as a final kind of comment, I think we heard from communities too. You come out and listen, and then sometimes or often we don't actually see our feedback then incorporated into your decision making. So I think as we're talking about the draft rules and looking at the draft rules, it will be helpful for us to identify places where we heard community and we're trying to honor that feedback and putting it into our rules. Again, I think the good thing is that we have some themes, and I think that we will see some updates to our rules that will hopefully be able to address some of the feedback that we've gotten.
Very good. All right. I think we have covered the ECMC summary of disproportionately impacted community meetings for the CI rulemaking. With that, we're going to move to our next OGDP. I think it's good to take 5 minutes to get that set up. So it is 10. Let's return at 10:33. And if we could get the applicant and the witnesses set up to go, that would be great. All right, welcome back. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission January 10th meeting. We now are taking up docket 2208-00205, an oil and gas development plan for the applicant BNL Enterprise. It's called the Galactica Pegasus 3. Great name.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Priscilla.
And let me confirm that I've got my people on here. I see Andre and I see Shane. So I believe we are all in attendance here.
Very good. AAG Mercer will swear in the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the panelists. I'll just one at a time ask you to each raise your right hand, state your name, and that you swear to tell the truth. Mr. Gillespie, if you could go first, please.
Shane Gillespie, I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Gross? You're on mute.
Sorry, my name is Andrea Gross and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
Mr. Rochella, you're on mute.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Joe Pershella with Wellborn, Sullivan, Meck and Tully on behalf of the applicant B&L Enterprise. And I'd like to start with just appreciating all the work that staff has done and put into their review of this oil and gas development plan. With me today are Shane Gillespie, landman at B&L, and Andrew Gross with Upstream Petroleum Management, who consulted and developed the permitting for this OGDP. As the chair noted, the name of this OGDP is the Galactica Pegasus 3, and it is similar to previous applications that you have heard from B&L involving helium development in Los Animas County, Colorado. The application covers approximately 2,548 acres in Los Animas County. It covers portions of sections 29 and 33, Township 29 South, Range 54 West, and sections 5 and 7, Township 30 South, Range 54 West. We're asking that the commission approve 4 oil and gas locations. Those are the Jackson 29 Southwest 2954 pad, the Jackson 33 Southeast Northeast 2954 pad, the Jackson 5 Southwest Northeast 3054 pad, and the Jackson 7 Northwest Northeast 3054 pad. B&L is proposing to drill 1 vertical well on each of these locations to explore for and produce helium gas from the Lions Formation. B&L's leasehold covers fee and federal mineral ownership that grant B&L the right to produce helium gas. The fee lessor is also the surface owner for these locations. With respect to the federal minerals, only the Jackson 29 pad will develop federal leasehold. B&L has a lease in place as well as federal bonding, but has not yet submitted the federal APD, such that it's not concurrently seeking federal permit, and Rule 303A6 does not apply. B&L will submit for its federal APD following approval of this OGDP application. With respect to spacing, the lands are not subject to any commission spacing orders and are therefore subject to Rule 401. B&L is proposing to develop the application lands on a leasehold basis pursuant to Rule 401B. The Lions Formation is less than 2,500 feet in depth. The wells are located more than 200 feet from lease lines, and there are no other existing or permitting wells in the Lions Formation within 300 feet of the proposed wells. Therefore, no spacing is required and has not been applied for. These locations are on rural rangeland, as I mentioned, on fee surface that has active cattle grazing operations on this ranch. B&L has worked very closely with the surface owner and as well the Nature Conservancy, which owns a conservation easement on the surface. In discussions with both the owner and the Nature Conservancy, B&L has reached a surface use agreement that governs all of B&L's operations on this ranch. Importantly, the surface use agreement is subject to the Nature Conservancy's conservation easement and memorializes the parties' agreement as to these locations, as well as the access roads, and ensures the protection of the conservation values of the easement on the ranch throughout all of the B&L operations. Some of the conservation values include protection of open space, scenic and natural habitats, protection of natural wildlife and plant species habitat, and species such as the long-billed curlew, the curved-bill thrasher, swift fox, plains leopard frog, mountain lion, black bear, elk, and bobcat. And some of the plant species include pinyon juniper woodland and savanna, ponderosa pine, shortgrass grassland, cholla shrublands, and I know I probably pronounced that incorrectly, and riparian vegetation. The locations do not meet any of the criteria under Rule 304B2B. Therefore, an alternative location analysis was not required and was not conducted. That said, these locations were carefully selected in consultation with the surface owner and the Nature Conservancy pursuant to the terms of that surface use agreement. The Commission's review is therefore under Rule 301A. And as you'll hear today, these locations are on rural, privately owned rangeland. There are no receptors within 2,000 feet of the locations. The locations are situated outside high priority habitat. That B&L's operations are very low impact with no hydrocarbon production. And that B&L, as I mentioned, has agreed to a surface use agreement with the surface owner and the Nature Conservancy. Based on these considerations and the Commission's applicable operating rules and regulations, BNL submits that the siting of these locations does avoid adverse impacts and that with the best management practices will protect, minimize, mitigate any adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, in the environment and protect against adverse impacts to air, water, and biological resources. Before you hear the specifics of this application, however, BNL will present a broader overview of its exploratory helium development plans within Los Animas County. Helium development in Los Animas County is truly exploratory, and it's unlike the more established helium development in Cheyenne County with existing midstream infrastructure and processing plant. And it's very much unlike the oil and gas development of the Wattenberg field in Weld County. As you will hear, BNL is beginning to collect data that will inform its future development plans, and it will continue to engage with staff as its plans evolve. Moreover, you will hear why vertical development is the technology that's best suited to efficiently and economically develop the helium resource with minimal surface footprint. As I mentioned, this development is in Los Animas County, which is the relevant local government, but it does not regulate the setting of oil and gas locations. BNL has consulted with the county regarding these locations, and the county has not provided any objection to the proposed locations. The county does require building permits, which BNL will submit after approval of the OGDP. Notice has been given pursuant to Rule 504A and 303E1. No petitions or interventions were received. And on December 29th, 2023, the director issued the director recommendation, which recommends approval of BNL's application with one condition of approval regarding topsoil testing. There is one topic that's raised in the director recommendation that I would like to address, that on page 5, under environmental resource considerations, water resources, there's a statement, quote, that the applicant did not provide a field verification of the mapped wetland as determined by a professional wetland scientist or professional biologist. All water resources information contained within the Form 2As was acquired from the ECMC GIS and NWI map. This may have been overlooked in the review, but BNL did hire a third-party environmental consulting firm to conduct a full aquatic survey, which does contain a wetland delineation and was submitted as part of BNL's wildlife plan. And there was a wetland memorandum that summarized that aquatic survey's conclusions submitted with the Form 2As. Ms. Gross is prepared to speak to the aquatic survey in her presentation. And with that, I would like to request that and move that BNL's application in the oil and gas development plan does satisfy the Conservation Act and Commission rules and is protective of public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, and will protect against the impacts to air, water, soil, and biological resources. We would request that the Commission adopt the Director's recommendation and approve the application. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Gillespie and Ms. Gross, who will provide a presentation on the development plan, the locations, as well as answer any Commissioner questions. And if you give me a moment, I will share my screen to bring up the presentation.
We see your screen, but it's blue. It doesn't contain a PowerPoint.
There we go. Can you
There we
see
go.
the presentation?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, and I will turn this over to Mr. Gillespie to give his introduction.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Shane Gillespie. I'm the landman at BNL Enterprise, Blue Star Meeting. Joe, if you just want to move to slide 2. This corporate disclaimers here, so we can go to slide 3. Slide 3 is the presentation outline. So we'll spend a little time talking about the program overview. As Joe mentioned, you know, Los Animas County being Colorado's largest, it's sometimes hard to orient these OGDPs as they relate to each other. So we'll look a little bit at that. More particularly at the Galactica Pegasus Development Plan, and then specifically OGDP 3 for Galactica Pegasus. We'll go over the Aquatic Resources Survey that Joe mentioned. We'll look at the details of the specific locations, the alternative drilling method evaluation that Joe mentioned, and then just some general information that kind of bears on cumulative impacts and what full field development might look like. Next slide, Joe. So our exploration program, we think about it in three main areas, moving from west to east. There's Enterprise, then Voyager, and then Galactica Pegasus. In Enterprise, we've got one approved OGDP. We drilled the Enterprise 16-1 there. That well is now P&A. Moving east at Voyager, we've got two approved OGDPs, the Triple B and the Bowling Daniel. We'll split our first well, which is the Triple B 33 there this Friday. And then I've noted one provisional OGDP, and really what that is you can see the blue dots on the map there. Those are locations that we've selected, and we're preparing the OGDP submission for. Moving over to Galactica Pegasus, which is the subject of today, there are three existing OGDPs that are approved, the State 35, 36, the State 9, 16, GDP2. There's one pending, which is today's. And then again, one provisional OGDP, which would be forthcoming. Next slide, Joe. So looking at more specifically at Galactica Pegasus, among the three approved OGDPs, there are 7 locations. In this OGDP, there are 4. And in that provisional OGDP, we think there's probably 5. Just some context on the operations plan total. Like Joe mentioned, this is exploration phase. Kind of how things go as we move from assessment to exploration to assessment and then to full development. So we expect that we'll do some assessment well drilling this year here in Galactica Pegasus. After that, we'll review those wells, see how they performed. Assuming that they're commercial, we'll start with the full line installation, the processing facility installation, and then eventually move on to full development drilling. You can see on the map there's a legend on the right, but the approved locations are in red. The processing facility that we route that gas to is in the red square. These locations are in the purple dots, the provisional are the blue dots, and then we expect that there may be enough volume here that the initial processing facility won't take the entirety of it, and so we'll install a new one. It's in a little green square, kind of in the southwest corner of the development area. Next slide, Joe. Looking specifically at this OGDP, like Joe said, there are 4 locations. They're all 1 well per, shallow locations. This is all range land. The landowner runs a cow-calf operation here. The service use agreement's executed. Joe mentioned that. I would like to point out the prominent role the Nature Conservancy took in this project. We walked all these access routes, all the locations with them, and their representative more than once. So they've been out there and they've been real helpful in maintaining all those things, all those protections that Joe mentioned. So we're happy to have their consult, and they've in fact, their representative is in fact helping the surface owner beyond that interaction, and so they continue to be involved. There are no locations in high priority habitats here, and like Joe said, no 304B2B criteria. I'll turn it over to Andrea for a little bit, and Andrea will go over some aquatic survey reviews.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Andrea Gross. I act as the permit agent for BNL Enterprise. I would like to highlight something a little different than what we have in the past, in that BNL had an aquatic resource survey done in October of 2022 of the greater Galactica Pegasus area. We did mention this survey in our previous OGDP, and one of the something that resulted from that survey was the moving of the Jackson 01 location because it was found to be too close to a wetland. The objectives of the resource survey was to investigate all potential waters shown in the National Wetlands Inventory and National Hydrology Database to determine if a wetland or ordinary high watermark indicators are present. They also went down there to investigate any potential drainage locations identified by photos or topographic maps, as well as for all features with a wetland or ordinary high water mark indicators, they would assign a hydrological regime, which is similar to that wetland delineation that Joe spoke about earlier. For all those features with a wetland or ordinary high water mark, they were assessing the connectivity to the nearest TNW, which is traditional navigable waters, which would be the Arkansas River, which is 48 miles to the north of these locations. There were a couple results that came out of them. Two main surface water or features were identified and analyzed, one of which was the Chapman Canyon. It is a pretty, it is featured on all the topographical maps, and there is an existing 2-track that runs adjacent to this drainage. At the time, it was a dry drainage. There are multiple creek crossings that the existing 2-track has already constructed or changed the landscape. In this survey, one of the other main areas of interest to BNL was to determine if these creek crossings would require a 404 permit with the Army Corps. It was determined that Chapman Canyon would likely be considered jurisdictional waters of the US. And if the crossings required certain improvements such as culverts, or they would meet the threshold of meeting that 404 permit, BNL has already discussed with a water engineer and expert to help prepare those permits prior to construction. Next slide, Joe. Thank you. The other feature was the Smith Canyon, very similar to Chapman Canyon. There's already an existing 2-track that follows this canyon. There are some creek crossing as well as this one. We would use the same criteria with the Chapman Canyon to determine if the Clean Water Act compliance, which would be, I believe, a 404 permit, would be required. This was a pretty significant survey for BNL. It gave them a lot of great information regarding the landscape, any existing wetlands or ordinary high water marks or sensitive water features that needed to be avoided. If they couldn't be avoided, we've discussed in our BMPs ways to minimize and mitigate impacts to it. I would like to note, and Shane already discussed this, the existing 2-track that is adjacent to these water or these drainages, it was requested from the Nature Conservancy that this existing 2-track still be utilized. It is one of the main asks or requirements with the Nature Conservancy that BNL use existing roads, even if they're unimproved 2-tracks at all possible. Next slide, please. The next couple slides just indicate the details of each site-specific location. Joe and Shane have already gone over much of this. I'll just highlight a few things. The Jackson 05 will be a total of 1.2 acres at its largest, but it'll be reduced down to just 0.2 acres after interim reclamation. This location is fee surface and fee minerals. No ALA criteria was met. Next slide. The Jackson 07 Northwest Northeast 3054, very similar to the previous one. This one was a little larger just because of topography. It will be 1.3 acres of disturbance at its largest and will be reduced down to 0.3 after interim reclamation. Next slide. The Jackson 29 Southwest Southwest is the location that has some federal minerals that will be developed. As Joe mentioned, the federal APD has not yet been submitted. The bond is in place and BNL will finalize that APD and submit to the BLM. This one is also 1.3 acres of disturbance, but it'll be reduced down to 1.2 acres. Next slide. The final location is the Jackson 33 Southeast Northeast 2954. This one at its largest will be 1.4 acres of disturbance, and then after interim reclamation, it will only be 0.2 acres of disturbance. Again, no ALA criteria was met. This does not have any federal minerals. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Shane to discuss drilling methodology.
Yeah, so in response to some questions on an earlier OGDP from the commission regarding whether we might be able to employ some alternative drilling methods to reduce pad counts, we built this slide just to kind of show how we arrived at vertical drilling. There's some visual aids there on the right, but we'll kind of go down the list here, the methods. Directional drilling, generally applicable wells of sufficient depth to build directional curves prior to encountering target depth. And what that means is you need enough vertical distance between the surface and the target to build curve, as we all know. Drilling bits can't turn at 90s; they have to turn at slopes, and you need to be able to do that twice on a directional well before you get to target depth to use it. Even if that were possible, you need to use larger rigs with directional tools. You'll have to have a circulation system, which has impacts on water use. There's always going to be some increased mechanical risk whenever you're building curves, and that just increases the chance of mechanical failure. And development pattern wise, it really works best when you can drill from common pads, but minimize the step out such that you're not drilling a bunch of wellbore that's not productive. So directional drilling, really not applicable. Horizontal, going to have a lot of the same features as directional, as far as kind of sufficient depth to build curves, the larger rigs, the circulation system, and the mechanical risk. Development patterns for horizontal drilling work best when you can encounter the target formation along the entirety of the horizontal wellbore, which is not the case for us. So, we selected vertical drilling, even though it does take, more pads, because it's best for shallow, low pressure wells. We can use smaller rigs. They have smaller footprints and thus smaller pads. They're air drilled, so we don't need a circulation system. There's very little mechanical risk, just going straight down. And it really does work best for exploratory wells with unknown productivity. Next slide. Kind of on that theme, this is just kind of how it goes on the exploration test wells. Location construction, because we're building smaller locations, we can build them a little faster. We're only out there about 2 or 3 days. We can use rig liners instead of kind of soil cementing. The drilling takes less amount of time. We figure 6 to 10 days. And then facilities prep is kind of the last stage. Once we establish that one of these wells are commercial is when we'll start building the facilities out. And so there'll be a period where these wells are shut in until we can get them connected up to the gathering lines and the plant at the end. Speaking of cumulative impacts, on the next slide, Andrea's got some tables to go through.
Thanks, Shane. In the last OGDP hearing, Commissioner Mesner, we really heard what you were saying about cumulative impacts and what you would like to see from them. We have highlighted a couple of the cumulative impacts that we believe are the most impactful in this area. They're air emissions, traffic, and overall surface disturbance. The emissions are going to peak during construction and drilling and testing due to the increased traffic in the area, as well as the actual drilling operations. However, these emissions are going to decrease significantly once the wells are placed into production and on a pipeline. Very similar to the air emissions, traffic will be the most during construction and drilling. However, once it is tied into an offsite production facility, traffic will be reduced significantly. And the existing truck traffic to the location would be for routine maintenance and inspections, such as the stormwater management inspections. And then we did note in our last hearing that the surface disturbance was of concern to the commissioners, and they wanted to see an overall picture of what that would look like. Now, I understand that they are looking for multiple OGDPs, but in this table right here, we have the disturbance broken down per pad and then what each disturbance is. I'd like to note that the majority of the surface disturbance is for the access road. We are still utilizing existing access roads, and much of the disturbance that's in this table is actually upgrading the existing road. BNL has attempted to get almost all of the pipeline disturbance within the access road right-of-way. However, the Jackson 33 has additional surface disturbance with the pipeline, as that is the location that will tie into the previously approved State 36 pipeline infrastructure. I would like to note that we have also reached out to staff to better understand how and what we could provide in our cumulative impacts plans that would provide a better overall picture of BNL's planned operations for each region. In our next OGDP, you will see additional maps and additional tables that will look at the overall area that they're planning on operating and the overall disturbance and impacts to the area. Next slide.
So slide 16 is just to kind of try and tie the previous 3 slides together and address some of the questions about what full development looks like. So what you're looking at there is kind of, you've got your exploration wells. We'll tie those into the CDP or the helium plant through poly gathering lines indicated by the green lines there. So there's really minimal disturbance at the sites themselves. All that gas gets transferred to the central processing facility. And that's where the main truck traffic is. They'll load out from the processing facility into the tube trailers. There's a picture of one of those tube trailers on the first slide. And that's where most of the traffic is incident to, because that's where the saleable product gets loaded into the trucks and shipped out to the buyer. That's kind of the end of our prepared remarks. Happy to address any questions.
Great, thank you very much. If we could stop the screen share, I'll be able to see my fellow commissioners. All right, we are now at that opportunity for questions from commissioners. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for your presentation today. And I just want to say thank you for putting all of the pieces together for me, because I've kind of had some frustration with some other operators. Like you keep coming with these pieces and I don't know how the whole picture comes together. And I just want to say thank you. I understand now what your plan is, what your modus of operandi, right? Super helpful. If I'm understanding correctly, what we've already proposed and what you're drilling is going to an existing processing facility. What we're considering today might be able to tie into that existing, or you might have to build a new processing facility because that existing one can't handle the volume. Is that what I heard you say?
No, thank you for the question. Clarification, the processing facility isn't built. So because these are modular and they're really dependent on the productivity of the wells, what we'll do first is drill the wells and establish whether they'll be commercial or not. Once we do that, we'll make the election whether to install the processing facility. So in the event the wells aren't productive, we'll avoid having the disturbance with establishing that processing facility. So the processing facility won't be built until we can establish commercial production. Okay,
could I ask some clarifying questions?
Sure.
Okay, so the wells that you have already drilled, are those temporary? I don't know if this is the right terminology. Are those temporarily shut in? They're viable or they're not. You're going to drill some more, see how the system connects, and whether or not you're going to build a processing facility. What if? Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Is that correct?
So right now there was only one well that has been drilled. It's over in the Enterprise OGDP, and it's been P&A'd, so it's in reclamation.
Okay.
We're currently drilling a well at Voyager. Once we establish that well will be commercial, we'll install the processing facility at Voyager. We'll move to drilling the assessment wells at Galactic Pegasus this year. Do the same thing, assess those wells, establish whether they'll be commercial, and in the event they are, we'll build the processing facility at Galactic Pegasus. And it may be, because Galactic Pegasus, as you saw on the slide, is kind of a larger area, it may require another processing plant to handle the volumes of gas. You can see on the slide, but the area is basically a township large, and so it just may be more practical, commercial to install 2 facilities rather than 1.
Okay, so thank you. And what is the footprint of a processing facility? And then after the product goes to a processing facility, how does it get to its final destination?
Yeah, so the processing facility, like I said, is skid mounted. It's modular, and so it really takes about 3 acres of actual equipment. Then there's a loadout area. To your last question, the helium tube trailers load right out of that processing facility, and from there are transferred either, and it depends, it may go to further processing over in Cheyenne County. It may go to a buyer Because at that point it is a saleable project. So it just depends on what the buyer specs are, whether they want it further refined or not.
Okay. And sorry, another technical question. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand it. When you are drilling for helium and maybe you get natural gas, you can collect those two things together and it gets separated out somewhere. You don't need a separate line for natural gas. Am I understanding how this kind of works?
So typically, when we think about helium production, it's typically produced that way. So it's a constituent of natural gas stream. In this particular area, it's a pure helium play. We don't expect to encounter any hydrocarbons of any nature. What we'll get is helium and some carrier gases.
Okay, thank you. Very, very helpful. Thank you for all the information today.
Absolutely.
Great. Next questions? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for addressing the questions that we sent in. Ms. Gross, just a bit of a follow-up on the field verification of wetlands. As I understood it, initially, I think it was mentioned that it was in the wildlife plan. I didn't find it in there, but I think I heard you state that the field verification was done for the entire area for all of the potential wells all at once. Did I mishear that, or is that what you said?
The biologist went down there for the wells that they had been given, which are the wells that you guys have seen in OGDP 2, 3, and I believe a couple other, it was in that provisional OGDP. So yes, they did a desktop analysis of any mapped wetlands and then went down into the field to assess those that they saw on the map to determine if they were wetlands.
Thank you. And then you mentioned a few that were jurisdictional wetlands. Is that to be presumed that the others that they went to verify did not turn out to be jurisdictional wetlands?
I believe so. And Commissioner Ackerman, I will double check, but I want to make sure that you guys have access to that aquatic survey. So I'll work with staff to make sure that you can have it. There were some wetlands that were identified. The biggest result was in the previous OGDP for Jackson 01, there was a wetland that they identified and we decided that it was too close. So they moved the Jackson 01. All the other wetlands that were determined and identified within the survey had no impact on the locations as they were proposed. The access road did get revised or skewed a little bit in some areas where the biologist identified that the access road, even if it's an existing, we should probably move it a little further away when it goes to be constructed.
Thank you. And just a couple of follow-ups. When you say the survey, do you mean the actual field verification or desktop review, or what do you mean when you say the survey?
Field verification. We got some really great shape files from the biologist and water expert that showed us exactly like GPS coordinates of where the wetlands are, as well as areas on that drainage, the canyons that he believed we should be aware of and move the access road.
Thank you. So just to make sure that I understand with regard to this specific OGDP, it's clear that a desktop review was done of potential wetlands, and it sounds like you've done some field verification. Were there specific field verifications done for the wetlands that were, or potential wetlands that were identified via the desktop review on the pads associated with this OGDP?
There was, yes, there was, correct.
Thank you. And we found those not to be wetlands.
Not wetlands or far enough away that we would not, with BMPs, they would be mitigated. Any impacts would be mitigated.
Understood. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Good questions. Further questions for the applicant from commissioners? All right, moving into the deliberations phase. Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I really don't have a lot. I have a couple of points to make, and one of them is associated with the comment that I just made on field verification of identified downstream potentially conductive pathways for materials that are brought up during OGDPs. associated with wetlands. And our regulation number 303A5B, Roman numeral 3BB, states that an evaluation and identification of potential contaminant migration pathways and likely distances from the proposed oil and gas locations to the nearest downstream riparian corridors, wetlands, and surface waters of the state. If the operator identifies any such contaminant migration pathways, the operator will provide a qualitative evaluation of the baseline. And so this is why we've had this conversation today. The intent is to take a look via desktop review at potential contaminant pathways, specifically wetlands and other waters of the state. And if those are potentially identified via desktop review, then the operator has to do a field survey and qualitative evaluation of the baseline. And so thank you for elaborating on that, Ms. Gross and others. I also wanted to just state I've had extensive coordination and collaboration with the Nature Conservancy in Colorado, in Southern Colorado, and specifically on a number of projects. And I've always found their surface agreements and conservation practices to be of a high caliber, and can appreciate the work that was done in coordination with the Surface Owner and the Nature Conservancy, and expect that it's one of thoughtful and effective conservation. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you for those thoughts. Others with deliberative thoughts? Commissioner Messner, then Commissioner McGowan.
Go ahead, Commissioner McGowan. I was just going to move approval.
I will second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much to the applicant. Thanks to staff for working with you. Your OGDP has been approved.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
All right, as is normally the case, let's take 5. Let's return at 10:18, and we'll take up the next docket. If we could get Wave Tech up and running, that would be great. Oh, I love it how a plan comes together. I'll come back and everybody's online. We're ready for the swearing in of the witnesses. We're taking up docket 230300082.
Thank you. Good morning. We do have our Wave Tech witnesses here, and they are ready to be sworn in.
Okay, I'm not seeing AG Mercer, so I can do this.
I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I didn't see you. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So good morning to the panel. I'll go one by one and ask you to raise your right hand, state your name, and that you swear to tell the truth. Ms. Gross, I see that you're still with us, and I would just remind you that you're still under oath from the last time around. I'll begin with Mr. Bowen.
My name is David Bowen, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Igor Gendelman.
My name is Igor Gendelman, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Vogel.
My name is Patty Vogel, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Edward Gendelman.
My name is Edward Gendelman, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Falk.
My name is Steve Falk, and I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Eby.
My name is David Eby. I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Davies. Oh, we can't hear you. I'm not sure if you're muted. We still can't hear you.
Yeah. Hey, Mr. Davies, give me a thumbs up if you swear to tell the truth. There you go.
All right, we'll note that for the record. He gave his thumbs up. Mr. Joby.
My name is Patrick Jobe. I swear to tell the truth.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Wazelinski, the panel is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. We do have a PowerPoint, so give us just a minute to get that pulled up, and then I will get started.
I'm pulling it up right now. Just give me one quick second.
Perfect. Great. Okay. Well, good morning again, commissioners. My name is Kelsey Waselinki with Jost Energy Law. And with Jamie Jost, we represent WaveTech Helium in the Harker Victor Roberts Helium OGDP before you today in docket 2303-00082. We would like to thank Karen Voltura for her guidance and efforts on behalf of CPW, Cheyenne County for their support of the OGDP, and also ECMC staff and the director for their efforts on this OGDP. I would also like to mention that we do appreciate the commissioner questions that we received this week, and we will plan to address these at the conclusion of the presentation. Next slide. So this OGDP requests approval of an approximate 1,033.58 acre oil and gas development plan for the development of 3 new vertical wells to target helium gas in the Morrow V3 sandstone formation. The 3 requested Form 2As are for the #1 WaveTech Harker Family 1426 pad, the #1 WaveTech Victor Weed 4227 pad, and the #1 WaveTech Roberts 42-3 pad, as shown on this map. WaveTech will utilize 3 approximate 320 acre drilling and spacing units established by Order 477-3 for the targeted Morrow V3 sandstone. All gas produced from the Morrow Reservoir will produce directly to the existing Ladder Creek pipeline system. WaveTech does not expect to produce oil as part of this development. The 3 proposed locations are in Cheyenne County. As you know, Cheyenne County does not regulate the siting of oil and gas locations. However, WaveTech has been in close communication and consultation with Cheyenne County through the OGDP process and has the county's full support. WaveTech also had extensive consultation with CPW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as part of this OGDP. The locations are within the Lesser Prairie Chicken Estimated Occupied Range, or EOR, which encompasses almost all of Cheyenne County. Within the EOR, the locations are also within a connectivity area for Lesser Prairie Chicken. However, all 3 locations are over 2 miles from the nearest 1.25-mile LEC buffer. WaveTech will discuss the habitat analysis, ALA, its consultation with CPW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the BMPs agreed upon to minimize impacts to the Lesser Prairie Chicken in the presentation today. And finally, WaveTech has complied with all notice requirements for the OGDP. No formal petitions were filed, and no public comments were received on the Form 2As. So I'll turn it over to Igor Gendelman, the Vice President of WaveTech, to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Igor Gendelman, and I'm the Vice President of WaveTech Helium. I appreciate the opportunity to present the Harker Victor Roberts Helium OGDP. Next slide, please. As we have mentioned in our previous hearings, helium is an essential element for many essential industries, and there are substantial reserves of it in southeastern Colorado. WaveTech staff has a lot of geological and operational experience and knowledge in this area, and we are leveraging it in our efforts to produce more helium. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the Harker Family 1426 pad location. We plan to drill 1 conventional vertical well at this location, targeting helium-containing natural gas. All the gas production will go to an already existing Ladder Creek plant through an already existing pipeline system. This location is fee surface and fee minerals with total drill and pad disturbance of about 3.5 acres. It's within the Lesser Prairie Chicken Estimated Occupied Range and connectivity area, and we consulted with CPW and conducted ALA. There are 3 wind turbines within 1,800 meters of the proposed location. And this location is more than 2,000 feet away from all residences, buildings, and schools. The closest town is Arapahoe. It's about 12 miles away. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the Victor Weed 4227 pad location. This location has the same bullet points as the previous one, except there are 4 wind turbines within 1,800 meters of the proposed location. Next slide, please. This is an overview of Roberts 42.3 location. This location also has the same bullet points as the previous locations, except the closest wind turbine is 2,000 meters away. And this location is in what used to be CRP. For this reason, WaveTech agrees to a timing stipulation for drilling per CPW consultation. And our wildlife biologist will talk more about this. Also, in discussions with the surface owner, it has been confirmed that this location is no longer under CRP. Next slide, please. Targets for both wells are more fluvial channel sandstones. The reservoir is highly permeable and is part of a separate gas accumulation. These locations were spaced by order number 4773. As this slide indicates, our target is very narrow and we are very limited on where our wells can be placed. Next slide, please. This is the permitting timeline. WaveTech will continue to work with ECMC staff on process improvements for improved completeness timing. Next slide, please. This shows phases of operation. Pad construction will take about 4 days per location. We will drill 3 new wells. This will take about 14 days per well. Basic production equipment will be installed if the wells are productive. All the gas will go into an already existing pipeline. I would also like to add that we have located a disposal well that's a lot closer to our wells, about 12 miles away. It's near the town of Arapahoe. We talked about this at our last hearing. Next slide, please. This shows the estimated occupied range for lesser prairie chicken. Now I'll pass this presentation on to our wildlife biologist, Steve Falk.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you, commissioners. Hello, my name is Steve Falk, and for nearly 30 years, I have worked as a biologist focusing on ecological risk assessment, ESA compliance, and NEPA impact analysis. As we know from previous presentations, in 2023, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service listed the northern distinct population segment of the lesser prairie chicken as threatened. The state of Colorado also lists the species as threatened. Using the ECMC GIS online website and reviewing high priority habitat layers that were made effective November 30th, 2023, each of the proposed locations are determined to be within Rule 309 E1 other consultation habitats, including estimated occupied range and connectivity areas. None of the proposed locations today are within Rule 1202C NSO habitats. Those would be LEC sites for the chicken, or Rule 120D density habitats that include focal areas. Each of the proposed locations are more than 2 miles from the nearest LEC buffer. These locations were visited. I visited these locations in August 2022 and again in July 2023. And I was joined by Jonathan Reitz, the local lesser prairie chicken biologist that works for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Habitat at Harker Farms and Victor Weed locations is described as native grassland. At the time of the visit, there was evidence that both locations were actively grazed. Habitat at the Roberts 42-3 location is described as grassland CRP. CRP, or the Conservation Reserve Program, was established in 1985 and is a program where landowners are paid by the Farm Service Agency a yearly rent not to commercially farm their land, but to instead plant species that will improve the quality of the habitat. During the 2023 visit of the Roberts 42-3 location, there was evidence that the grassland CRP had been grazed, and/or mowed or hayed. As previously presented, there are several wind turbines within 1,800 meters of the Harker Farms and Victor Weed locations. Although the Roberts location does not fall within 1,800 meters of a wind turbine, there is a nearby turbine that impacts the quality of the grassland CRP that's on the same parcel as the proposed location. WaveTech initiated consultation with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and requested technical assistance or informal consultation from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Because the lesser prairie chicken is protected at both the federal and state levels, WaveTech completed an analysis of project-related impacts to the lesser prairie chicken. As I've described before, there are several documents that were obtained from the Fish and Wildlife Service, or at least referenced, that have guided this impact analysis. In short, a variety of factors were considered in the evaluation of potential impacts to the lesser prairie chicken. These include lesser prairie chicken biology and known occurrence and distribution information, habitat suitability, and existing indirect impacts. Slide 13, please. Now I'll describe more detail of our impact assessment. Implementation of the proposed Harker Farms, Victor Weed, and Roberts projects is not expected to result in impacts and take to the lesser prairie chicken. This determination is based on several factors, including the potential for significant habitat modification, potential for impairment of essential behaviors, and lastly, the potential to harm and injure. Now I'll describe each of those important factors. Regarding significant habitat modification, habitats associated with Harker Farms and Victor Weed locations are characterized as unsuitable based on the presence of several wind turbines within 1,800 meters of the proposed locations. As we've presented before, lesser prairie chicken are known to avoid vertical structures, which renders these habitats less suitable and most likely avoided. Habitat at Roberts 42.3 location is potentially suitable lesser prairie chicken habitat. The grassland CRP that is proximal to the CRP, particularly CRP that is proximal to a known lek, and CRP that has not been grazed or mowed, can provide highly suitable nesting and brood rearing habitat. However, the grassland CRP at the Roberts 42.3 location has been grazed and most likely mowed or hayed. These uses degrade the suitability of the grassland CRP for the lesser prairie chicken. Also to note, near the Roberts 42.3 location is a wind turbine and 2 operational oil and gas wells that further degrade the suitability of the grassland CRP associated with the Roberts 42.3 location. Other factors to consider in habitat suitability include patch size, degree of connectivity and isolation of the patch, and lastly, existing indirect impacts. The patch size is approximately 290 acres at the parcel where Roberts 42.3 is proposed. And it's known that lesser prairie chickens are typically associated with contiguous habitats of at least 2 square miles, or approximately 1,280 acres. In regards to connectivity and isolation, the Roberts location occurs on a parcel that's characterized as isolated and not connected with a larger occurrence of suitable habitat. Cultivated crops and other non-suitable habitats occur on all 4 sides of the parcel associated with the Roberts location. And as I just described existing indirect impacts, there is a wind turbine and 2 operational oil and gas wells that degrade the suitability of the grassland CRP on the same parcel. In regards to impairment of essential behavior patterns, lesser prairie chicken females are known to nest in suitable habitats in close proximity of a lek. These proposed projects would not directly impact known LECs or associated production areas. Each of the proposed locations is more than 2 miles from a known LEC buffer. Implementation of these projects would not impair essential behavior patterns. Lastly, to discuss, excuse me, the risk of injury or harm to lesser prairie chickens. Lesser prairie chicken are not expected to use habitats associated with the Harker Farms and Victor Weed locations. As such, construction and operation of the proposed facilities at these locations is not expected to harm or injure lesser prairie chickens. WaveTech has agreed to CPW's recommendation of implementing a no drilling stipulation between March 1st and July 15th. Implementation of this stipulation will minimize the potential for drilling activities to result in harm or injury to lesser prairie chickens. In summary, implementation of the Roberts 42-3 location would not result in significant habitat modification, would not significantly impair essential behavior patterns, and would not be expected to result in injury or harm to lesser prairie chickens. This same analysis and this same determination was submitted to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service for their review. In their response, they stated, quote, they had no concerns for the project resulting in impacts to proposed, threatened, and endangered species. Slide 14, please. As the Commission is aware, WaveTech has completed and submitted the first version of the Comprehensive Wildlife Mitigation Plan. This plan includes OGDP 4 that we're presenting today. This plan was created at the request of the Commission and is intended to be revised as new OGDPs are proposed. WaveTech also prepares site-specific wildlife mitigation or, when appropriate, wildlife protection plans for each proposed location. The Comprehensive Wildlife Mitigation Plan acts as a summary of all the WaveTech plans and does not include any information that is unique or inconsistent with the site-specific mitigation plans. Thank you, and I turn it back over.
Thank you, Steve. WaveTech has provided alternative location analysis for this OGDP. Alternative locations trigger the same criteria as the proposed locations with respect to lesser prairie chicken EOR and connectivity area. And an alternative Roberts location would still be in what used to be under CRP. Next slide, please. Best management practices matching all the ones for our first 3 OGDPs will be used for these locations. For the Roberts location, there will be no drilling between March 1st and July 15 per CPW consultation. Now I'll pass this presentation back to Kelsey.
Thank you, Igor. So to summarize the Harker Victor Roberts Helium OGDP and WaveTech's request for approval, we note the following highlights. WaveTech had extensive consultation with CPW, including coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and has finalized a comprehensive wildlife mitigation plan with CPW for prior approved OGDPs, this OGDP, and future OGDPs. WaveTech cannot site outside of the EOR and connectivity area to target the narrow helium channel in this area, and WaveTech agreed to BMPs and a timing stipulation for drilling at the Roberts location to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential impacts to the lesser prairie chicken. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has no concerns with the siting of the 3 proposed locations. And finally, the director recommends approval. Next slide. This slide just shows again the relief requested for the Harker Victor Roberts Helium OGDP. We respectfully request approval of this OGDP and associated Form 2As. This does conclude our presentation. I think we can take the PowerPoint down, and I am happy to address the commissioner questions that we received this week. So we did receive several questions. I will go through them and read the question and then direct either myself or a witness here to answer each question. So the first question was, can you update us on your progress on working on a comprehensive wildlife plan, not just for existing and proposed developments, but for foreseeable future development? And I'll answer this one. So the current comprehensive wildlife mitigation plan covers the first 5 OGDPs in lesser prairie chicken habitat, and that includes 12 locations in the habitat. It will soon be updated with 6 more locations. And beyond these 6 new locations, WaveTech does not know what the future locations will be at this stage, but it commits to updating the comprehensive wildlife plan through consultation with CPW as those future locations come together. I also will note that we are continuing to work with Director Murphy to schedule a meeting about comprehensive planning. The second question is, the Roberts Pad is in grassland CRP. It is my understanding that grassland CRP lands cannot be developed for oil and gas. And I will direct this question to Patty Vogel, please.
Good morning. I'm Patty Vogel, and I have been in recent communications with the surface owner for the Roberts Pad. And I was informed by the surface owner that this parcel was enrolled in the CRP, but is no longer in that contract. That contract has expired. And WaveTech does have a surface use agreement with the surface owner, and she has expressed no concerns with development.
Thank you, Patty. The third question, can you address why you didn't do field verification of the presence or absence of potential identified wetlands? And I'll have Steve Falk answer that, please.
Thank you, Kelsey. I did 2 site surveys, 2 separate visits for all these locations. And during those visits, saw no evidence of field indicators for existing wetlands. I had, before my field visit, reviewed the National Wetland Inventory data that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife provides. Also reviewed data from EPA called My Waters. That's what it's called, sorry. Reviewed that information before I went in the field. Conducted my field evaluation, did not see any wetland indicators, particularly vegetation that's adapted to hydrologic conditions. And upon my first visit to the Victor Weed location, the farthest northern location, I identified its original location to be rather close to an existing and mapped watercourse, and suggested its relocation to increase that distance. And so based on modified pad location for that specific spot and the distance that was observed from other mapped water courses, determined to be no impacts to those waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. The next question is, can you provide more information about the proposed gathering and production facilities, such as timing of development, locations, progress, etc.? And I'll have Igor Gendelman address that.
Yeah, the gathering system is already in place. We just need to connect to it. It passes right next to our wells. And as far as production equipment, it's what we put in is a separator, a meter run, and a tank and 2 tanks. And that's it. And so all the gas will go into an already existing gathering system, and which will go to Ladder Creek, which is the helium plant, which will process the gas.
Thank you, Igor. The next question is, can you please address in more detail what restricts you from moving the Roberts Pad as per CPW recommendation to a nearby agricultural area instead of in CRP? And I believe, Igor, you were going to answer this question as well.
Yeah, we're chasing very narrow channels, and if we get out of what used to be CRP, we will no longer be able to hit our target.
Thank you. The next question is, I know we have approved several OGDPs. Has WaveTech drilled anything yet? Do they have an approved financial assurance plan? I'll send that back to you, Igor.
Yeah, we only have one permit so far, and we drilled. It's the Igo well. We have re-entered that well. Results were good, and production equipment is in place, and we have no other permits so far. Waiting for them.
And Igor, could you just address the status of the Form 3?
Yeah, we have submitted Form 3. There was some confusion on financial assurance because we placed the cash surety for a different well, and then we transferred it to the Igo well, and then our standing with ECMC was good, but we realized that it wasn't the case. So we have submitted Form 3 for the Igo well.
Thank you. Next question is, the helium and natural gas are connected to an existing natural gas pipeline, correct? And that connects to an existing processing facility. So the 24 truck traffic trips per year are just to address potential oil and produced water, correct? Igor.
Correct.
Thank you. Next question, have conversations with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service been completed? See CPW comments and updated listing of lesser prairie chicken suggests they talk to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I'll have Steve Falk address this.
Thank you. Glad to. Coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for OGDP for this presentation is concluded. They found no concerns with this project resulting in impacts to listed species. We continue to coordinate with Fish and Wildlife Service when we have new proposed OGDP, so that's potentially ongoing, but they're different locations. That's it.
Thank you. And the last question, is the operator okay with a COA that if more oil is produced than anticipated, that BMPs should be revisited regarding potential additional equipment or traffic? See CPW comments. And then quote, per the operator, limited or no oil production is expected. If substantial oil production does occur from this beyond what is projected at the locations, any additional requested equipment on site or traffic to the site should be reassessed for timing or traffic BMPs to minimize noise and traffic impacts. And Igor, if you could please address that.
Yeah, our current BMPs already take potential oil production into account, but we are open to additional suggestions if they exist.
Thank you. We are, of course, have our panel here, and if we did not answer a question, we are open to further questions or dialogue on these issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, and thanks for the proactive answering of commission submitted questions. That is always helpful to us and perhaps cuts down on some of the questions we may have otherwise. The panel is open for questions. I can't see everybody. There's too many people in the room. In particular, Commissioner Cross, if you have questions, I can't see you.
Understood.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks. I'm happy to kick off a couple of questions here. I did have a couple of clarifying questions and appreciate the, as the chair said, the response to our questions, as well as the presentation. Excuse me. My questions are largely associated, as you might imagine, with the Roberts location. And as was mentioned in testimony today, no drilling between March 1st and July 15th. I didn't see that in the 2A, but I did see it in the wildlife plan. And I think in the testimony today, we mentioned no drilling, but the wildlife consultation summary says, the operator has agreed to implement a timing stipulation at this location and avoid drilling and completion operations from March 1 through July 15th. So I just wanted to clarify, is the intent no drilling or completions between March 1 and July 15?
Yes, that's what CPW requested. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And then the CRP parcel, I couldn't find the size of the CRP parcel on the Roberts pad. Does anyone know what the, you mentioned, I think Mr. Falk mentioned it was relatively small. Can you tell us what the acreage is on the overall, and we should call it a former CRP parcel, it sounds like.
I can try to address that if it's appropriate.
Thank you.
I use simple desktop measuring tools, Google Earth Professional, to estimate the parcel size, not the location's pad size. And I estimated it roughly at 296 acres. I'd like to reemphasize that I'm a biologist and not a GIS professional. So it's roughly half a section, I believe.
Thank you. And then as a reminder, the actual Roberts pad size.
The drilling pad is about 3.5 acres.
Thank you.
And then it will be reduced to about 1 acre for production facilities.
And I just wanted to thank you, and I just wanted to verify, I think Mr. Gendelman, you mentioned that this is no longer enrolled in the CRP program. Do you know when it was extracted or withdrawn from the CRP program?
Eddie, can you answer that, please? Oh, Kelsey.
Yes, I was informed told that it was expired in November of 2023, approximately.
So it was removed in November of 2023, approximately. Is that what I heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Was it removed at the request of this development, or was it removed for other purposes, or do you know?
It was removed for other purposes, not for this process.
Thank you. And then my final question would be on the comprehensive wildlife mitigation plan. I know we've asked a lot about this in ongoing OGDPs and do appreciate you addressing that. And from what I understood, up to this point, the comprehensive plan is simply a running compilation of previous locations, but it's about to be updated to include 6 more locations. And I just wanted to clarify that the intent is to do that next all at once. The intent isn't to do it as the next 6 locations come up before us. They'll be added to the comprehensive plan subsequent to discussion. Does that question make sense, and is that correct?
Yeah, Andrea, do you want to answer that? Thank you.
I do, and I wanted to add, we had a consultation with Ms. Valtura from CPW on Friday to discuss the next several OGDPs. I think there was 2 other ones. And just to go along with the comprehensive wildlife mitigation plan, as well as what the commission has been asking us to do lately, which is more comprehensive planning. We are now not doing just like one OGDP with Karen Valtura. She's asked, and we agreed that we're going to do the next 2 with her so she can look at it as a broader region and planning. And that will be reflected in not only the wildlife mitigation plan, but as well as the OGDP that Wave Tech will prepare next. Did that make sense?
It did, and just to clarify a little further, so the next 2 OGDPs, is that the 6 locations in question?
Correct.
And so those will be updated, and those are, I think I heard in testimony, all that we have in the foreseeable future or know of in the foreseeable future for Wave Tech.
I believe there is one other OGDP. However, that one is not within any high priority habitat. It's a little further east than what you all have seen currently. So the next 2 are the OGDPs that are within high priority habitat.
Understood. Thank you. Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to follow up on one question that Commissioner Ackerman had asked about the Roberts pad and the timing restrictions associated with that. You know, I understand that it's drilling and completions is being contemplated here, but typically we see in these timing restrictions, you know, adherence to them associated with construction activities as well. And I guess I'm asking Ms. Gross, I guess, whether or not that was actually discussed with CPW and why or why not they didn't include construction activities and the timing restrictions associated with that pad.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Messner, for the question. It definitely was brought up, and we were very specific on, or Ms. Valtura was very specific on which stages would be the most impactful. to the species. And it's my understanding, and I'll let Steve chime in if he wants to add anything. It was very clear that the timing stipulations only were addressed or applied to the drilling and completions. And then completions are a little different for these wells. They are not the long-term drilling that you've seen in the DJ. There's no fracking. It's really just a natural completion and then testing. I believe it was because of the tall nature of the drilling rig and the equipment that would be on site that is the most impactful to this species. But we did make sure that she was not concerned with construction, and she did indicate that the timing stipulation would not be applied to construction.
If I may add, we can include construction. We won't construct in that period either. Construction here is very brief, only 4 days, so we don't need to be constructing within that period either.
Okay,
and I would be happy to provide a Form 4. I can work with staff to update the BMP on the Form 2A for the Roberts location. To include
just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that. If CPW is not requesting that, then that's not something necessarily that I'm requesting, although I do appreciate that that consideration could be made. But I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't missed if CPW did talk about that or did have an expectation. And so that's why I'm asking the question. And then just so I understand, because I might be confused, and I think this is a question for Mr. Falk, but and it's about the windmills and the disturbance associated with the windmills. In my head, from previous applications, I thought the impact distance was 1,800 feet. You've got 1,800 meters. I guess I'm just, and maybe I'm confused and misunderstood previous applications. It's meters, not feet, or?
It's definitely meters, and I apologize. Our presentation includes different units of measurement, and we might be able to tidy that up a little bit to avoid some confusion. But when I'm discussing indirect impact radii, these are radii that are assigned to different infrastructure. It's not just wind turbines, but they're the most dramatic on the landscape. They are presented in the guidance document in meters.
Okay. Those are the only questions I have. Thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Seeing no further questions, we move into deliberations. Commissioner Ackerman, it's been your day.
Yeah, I'm quick on the trigger today, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I appreciate that, and appreciate the conversation that we've had here today. You know, we ask a lot of questions about lesser prairie chicken. There's continued pressure and continued development on the plains of all types, not just oil and gas. So we try to do our part to make sure that all of the things in our jurisdiction are having minimal impacts on lesser prairie chicken. Just a reminder, and I think Mr. Falk stated this, that lesser prairie chicken in Colorado belong to the northern population segment, the northern distinct population segment, and were listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened formally as of March of last year, after a long and storied listing history. As such, the way that generally works is that wildlife is managed by the state unless and until it is in federal jurisdiction, which the ESA places it in. And so the primary regulator of lesser prairie chicken in this case is the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. And I would note that they expressed no concerns associated with this project. CPW then at that point really acts as the local expert on lesser prairie chicken populations. They asked for and received timing stipulations. And so after they did ask for the movement of the Roberts pad, their specific concern wasn't necessarily the extraction of the relatively small portion of former CRP in three or so acres, but rather the indirect impact that that location would have on the remainder of the CRP parcel. I appreciate the clarification that it is no longer in CRP and not subject to the restrictions associated with enrollment in the Conservation Reserve Program. Because of this extensive conversation and the continued efforts of Wave Tech to continue to coordinate with CPW and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I feel like the stipulations regarding the protection of lesser prairie chickens have been met with regard to this OGDP, and appreciate those efforts, and certainly would nothing but expect them to continue in the future. Because of that, Mr. Chair, I am in support of this OGDP and happy to make a motion when the time is appropriate.
Thank you very much. I think today has been a wildlife OGDP oriented sort of day, and so your fellow commissioners appreciate your critical review with your background. Further questions from commissioners? Perhaps you can go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the OGDP as presented. I'm not sure there was any additional conditions of approval on this particular one. If so, let me know.
AAG Mercer, you're our additional COA keeper of tracker. Did you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I did not.
Very good. We have a motion. Commissioner Ackerman is recognized.
Thank you. Did we need to include completions there? I didn't see that anywhere on the 2A or on the in the wildlife plan. I just saw drilling, and I think we agreed upon no drilling and completions during the timing restrictions.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Looking at the 2A for the Roberts location, I do see drilling and completion operations. Wildlife BMP, so it's BMP number 2, says operator will not conduct drilling or completions operations from March 1 through July 15th due to lesser prairie chicken, HPH.
Thank you, AAG Mercer. If I was as astute as you were, we could have avoided that whole conversation.
No worries.
I'll second the motion. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Wazelinski, to you and your team. We appreciate the efforts here. Again, heartfelt thanks to our staff for getting it to us in this place to where we are able to move forward. With that, we have concluded the business on our initial agenda for 2024. We look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.